Emily Carter, daughter of corrupt real estate tycoon Alexander Carter, rejects her father's criminal empire and becomes a lawyer fighting against his injustices. She exposes his crimes, faces threats and violence, and with allies, dismantles his empire. After Alexander is imprisoned, Emily builds a legacy of justice by creating a legal institute to fight corruption. Though haunted by her past and continuing threats, she transforms her inherited pain into hope and reform, ultimately redefining the Carter legacy with a focus on truth and justice. Before I dive into this story, drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about finding strength when you need it most. The night in New York was humming with the lull of traffic, neon lights flickering against the glass towers of Wall Street. In a penthouse on the Upper East Side, Alexander Carter was hosting his annual celebration, a banquet that celebrated his empire, Carter Enterprises, known for its ruthless real estate deals and almost mythic wealth. But only he, his closest circle, and his estranged business partners truly knew how the foundation of this empire had been built, not just on glass and steel, but on black money, offshore accounts, and bribes that could silence anyone too curious. At the head of a long mahogany table sat Alexander, his salt and pepper hair swept back, his whiskey glass half full. His face carried the smug air of a man who had beaten every rule in America's Book of Justice. Seated quietly beside him was his only daughter, Emily Carter, 26, recently graduated from Columbia Law School, a woman with sharp, determined brown eyes, who carried herself lightly in a world heavy with corruption. Emily, Alexander said, raising his glass for the crowd, is finally returning to the family business. Soon, she'll take her rightful place at Carter Enterprises, ensuring the legacy of our name continues. Laughter and applause followed the toast. Emily's lips formed the hint of a smile, but her stomach turned. Her father had never asked what she wanted to do with her life, he assumed. Tonight, she realized, was his announcement to bind her into chains of moral compromise. As the evening thinned and guests departed, Emily confronted him in the study. Papers lay across his desk, detailing sham contracts, property value manipulations, and transfers to Caribbean accounts. "I can't do this, Dad," she began. Alexander smirked, pouring himself another whiskey. "Can't do what, sweetheart?" "I can't be part of this machine. The bribes. The laundering. The lies. I became a lawyer to fight injustice, not to defend it." Her father's jaw stiffened. "This isn't about your ideals, Emily. It's about survival. Do you think all this," he gestured around, "came from honesty? No empire does. If you won't help me run it, someone else will. And you will have nothing." For a moment his veneer cracked, his voice hard and dangerous. "You will not betray me." Emily's heart pounded, but she didn't waver. "Then I'll walk away, even if it means walking away from you." The silence between them was jagged as glass. Alexander's empire had enemies within and without, and by rejecting him, Emily had stepped onto dangerous ground, not just as a daughter's rebellion, but as someone who could unravel everything. Weeks later, Emily began working in a non-profit law firm in Brooklyn, representing low-income families being evicted by property developers. Ironically, many of the cases were tied back to Carter Enterprises, her father's ruthless acquisitions of entire neighborhoods, where families were uprooted overnight. Emily's sense of purpose hardened. She documented every pattern she saw: shell companies buying properties for inflated sums, political figures receiving unexplained donations, and harassment of tenants by hired gangs. But her father wasn't blind. One evening, as Emily returned to her modest apartment, 2 black SUVs parked across the street. She heard footsteps behind her, quickening. A voice muttered close to her ear, "Your father says stop digging." Before she could react, one of the men shoved her into the wall. Pain shot through her shoulders. But instincts honed by fear and fury kept her on her feet. She screamed, drawing neighbors to their windows, and the men slipped back into the night. That night, Emily realized her father wasn't warning anymore, he was threatening. In court the next day, while representing a mother of three against Carter Enterprises' eviction notice, she argued fiercely until she won a temporary injunction. Her father sat silently in the back row, watching, his icy stare promising war. Emily knew he wouldn't forgive her. But what he didn't know was that she had recorded every threat, every document, and was building her own arsenal. She wasn't just going to resist him. She was going to destroy him. Emily reached out to investigative journalist Michael Torres, a Pulitzer-winning reporter known for bringing down corrupt officials. Meeting him at a small Brooklyn cafe, she shared only fragments at first, wary of trust. "These files," she said, sliding a USB across the table, "are just the beginning. Offshore ledgers, money trails linking Carter Enterprises to senators, even organized crime. But if I go public, my life ends before my story does. I need a platform I can't be silenced on." Michael leaned forward. "If this is real, Emily, we're talking about one of the biggest corruption scandals in New York's history. But Carter has friends everywhere. We'd both be hunted." "I've been hunted already," Emily replied coldly. The alliance formed that day would be the first crack in Alexander Carter's empire. Leaks began surfacing online, Carter Enterprises linked to Caribbean accounts, property manipulation schemes, and suspiciously quick resignations of city officials. For the first time in his life, Alexander felt his empire under siege, not from a rival tycoon, but from his own blood. Alexander retaliated with precision. Media outlets were bought to smear Emily's name, accusations of drug use, fake stories of bribe-taking, even claims that she was mentally unstable. One evening, her nonprofit office was set ablaze. Everyone escaped, but the message was undeniable. Emily's colleagues begged her to vanish into anonymity, but she refused. "If I back off now, he wins, and hundreds of thousands of families lose. I'd rather face him head-on." She began digging deeper, tracing her father's earliest deals from the 1980s. There she found the most damning evidence: murders disguised as construction accidents, political cover-ups, and a deal with a mob syndicate that had propped up Carter's first skyscraper. Emily didn't just want to end his empire anymore. She wanted revenge, for every family destroyed, every life ruined, every scar he carved into the city. And slowly, Alexander began to realize, his daughter wasn't just rejecting him. She was becoming his greatest enemy. Emily realized she couldn't do this alone. If she relied only on Michael's articles, her father's money and influence would drown the truth in fabricated noise. She needed a network. Through the nonprofit community, she connected with activists, disillusioned ex-employees of Carter Enterprises, and lawyers who had faced intimidation. At first, most were terrified to even be seen near her. But as the leaks grew stronger and public anger mounted against housing injustice, more people came forward. One man, Gregory Banks, who had once been Alexander's most trusted accountant, offered Emily critical ledgers, documents that spelled out wire transfers to politicians, organized crime families, and multinational corporations. "I kept these for years," Banks admitted, his hands trembling as he slid dusty files across a diner booth. "I knew one day I'd use them to survive. Maybe this day has come. But if you expose Carter, you're not only going against him, you're going against a racket that reaches DC." Emily met his frightened gaze. "Then we burn the whole network to the ground." For Gregory, it was the answer he both feared and respected. Meanwhile, Alexander Carter sat in his penthouse with a circle of advisors. His face, once calm and commanding, was marked with deep shadows. "She's your daughter, Alex," muttered Vincent Rossi, a longtime family associate with mob roots. "But she's becoming a weapon aimed at your own head. You can't keep ignoring it." "I've silenced senators," Alexander snapped. I've broken mayors. Do you really think Emily, a girl who barely lived outside my wealth, can hurt me? This is a phase. She'll fold when I tighten the screws. But even as he spat those words, doubt gnawed at him. His empire wasn't built only on power but on fear, fear of his ruthlessness, fear of his connections. Emily wasn't afraid anymore. And that made her more dangerous than gangsters or competitors. Late at night, he caught himself thinking about when she was a little girl, climbing into his lap with picture books, asking him why people on the street begged for food. He'd dismissed her innocence then. Now that same conscience was his nemesis. For the first time in decades, Alexander Carter felt something alien, vulnerability. Michael Torres' articles began to unravel the city's carefully spun web of corruption. With Emily's evidence, he built a series titled Empire of Ash, detailing how Carter Enterprises had rigged housing markets for 30 years. Investigations started to reopen. Families who had once been too scared to testify came forward. Alexander's allies in City Hall began to distance themselves. The streets in Brooklyn filled with protests, mothers holding signs reading "Homes, not blood money," construction workers shouting "No more Carters." The empire wasn't collapsing yet, but for the first time, the people saw cracks in its steel armor. And in one fiery protest outside Carter headquarters, Emily stood on a makeshift platform, addressing thousands. "My father claims this empire is his legacy," she declared, her voice vibrating with fury, "but your homes, your lives, your families are the bricks he crushed to build it. He wanted me to inherit his fortune. Instead, I choose to inherit the fight against him. And I will not stop until every stolen dollar is returned and every lie is exposed." The crowd erupted like a storm. It was no longer a battle between father and daughter. It was a movement. But Alexander was no fool. He knew public sympathy could be turned just as easily as it was gained. He orchestrated a counterplay. One evening, as Emily left her office, she was intercepted by federal agents. "Emily Carter," one agent said sharply, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, tampering with evidence, and collusion with organized crime." Her heart raced. This was impossible, fabricated, clearly, but the warrant was real. Her father had bribed just enough federal contacts to twist the law against her. For 2 weeks Emily sat in a cold detention cell, with tabloids splashing headlines like "Heiress turned criminal?" Emily Carter accused of fabricating evidence. Michael fought to keep the truth in circulation, but without Emily's direct voice, doubts began to creep into the public's mind. That's exactly what Alexander wanted, to fracture her credibility. But Emily never panicked. Because she had expected this. From the moment she started the leaks, she arranged for a contingency, a package of sealed documents given to Gregory Banks. It held not just evidence, but a personal video statement. "If you're watching this," she had said in the recording, "it means I've been silenced." But silence isn't defeat. Read the documents yourselves. And remember, every time you see my father in the headlines, ask yourself what truth he's trying to bury. The video went viral overnight. Public opinion swung back. Judges came under pressure. And 2 weeks later, Emily was released on bail, angrier, sharper, and more determined than ever. Her father had drawn blood. But she would strike harder. Emily understood that exposing her father's corruption wasn't enough. Men like Alexander could lose fortunes and still live free, protected by politicians. True justice meant ensuring he faced prison, or oblivion. With Gregory and Michael, she honed a new strategy, not just documents, but live testimony from the powerful men who had partnered with Alexander. They located Luis Ortega, a real estate rival who had nearly been killed in the 1990s accident scandal. Under heavy protection, Emily convinced him to speak. "You don't understand," Ortega warned. If I come forward, I'm a dead man. Carter never forgives. Emily looked into his eyes, unflinching. Neither do I. Slowly, witnesses lined up. Employers abused by Carter, contractors used as scapegoats, families destroyed by strategic evictions. Their voices, combined with her evidence, painted a monstrous portrait that no amount of media spin could hide. By the summer, a grand jury issued indictments against Carter Enterprises. Bank accounts were frozen. Properties seized. Politicians scrambled to cut ties. And yet Alexander Carter still sat in his penthouse, drinking aged whiskey, eyes burning with defiance. If she wants war, he muttered to Vincent Rossi, then I will give her war. The real climax came not in a courthouse but in the shadows of the empire's fall. Emily, escorted by plainclothes security, entered the penthouse she had once called home. Dust seemed to hang in the air, as if the empire's foundations had already begun to rot. Alexander was waiting. No lawyers, no guards. Just him and the sound of ice clinking in a glass. So, he said with tired arrogance, the prodigal daughter returns to stab her father in the back. Emily's stomach twisted, but she stood her ground. I didn't stab you, Dad. You did. Every crime, every lie, it was your own knife. I just exposed the wounds. He rose slowly, his face etched in anger and fragility. You think tearing me down redeems you? You carry my blood. As long as my name is on yours, you can't escape me. Emily's eyes hardened. Then I'll carve your name out of history. And when you rot in prison, I'll rebuild what you destroyed, without your shadow. For the first time, Alexander faltered. He saw not just rebellion in his daughter, but a finality. A child he thought would be chained to his power was now his executioner. As federal agents burst through the doors minutes later with warrants, Emily stepped aside, her gaze locked to his until the handcuffs clicked. That was the last time Alexander Carter saw freedom. Months passed. Carter Enterprises was dismantled, its holdings sold to fund restitution programs for displaced families. Politicians implicated in the scandal resigned or were prosecuted. Alexander, once untouchable, now sat behind iron bars, his empire reduced to ashes. And every headline carrying his downfall carried Emily's name, not as his heiress, but as the woman who brought him down. But Emily didn't see it as victory. She saw it as survival. The struggle had scarred her far more than she let anyone know. Late at night, she often found herself staring from her small Brooklyn apartment window, asking if she had truly won, or only destroyed something inside herself, too. Michael once asked her, "Do you regret it?" Emily's answer was simple. No. Because sometimes justice and revenge are the same thing. Even after Alexander Carter's sentencing, Emily realized that the shadow of his empire lingered. Carter Enterprises had been more than her father, it was a vast network of criminals, politicians, and investors who had thrived off his corruption. Though the skyscrapers bore new logos and neighborhoods slowly healed, whispers still trailed Emily. People eyed her suspiciously in court halls. Was she really different from him, or just another Carter playing a longer game? But what haunted her most were the threats. Letters slipped under her apartment door. Messages on burner phones. Anonymous graffiti scrawled across her office. Blood never forgets. You destroyed the king, but his soldiers remain. Emily knew cutting down her father didn't erase his legacy. It only scattered snakes, more dangerous because they were cornered. One of those snakes had a name, Vincent Rossi. The mob-linked ally of her father had evaded the initial indictments, slithering out through technicalities. For him, Alexander's downfall was both humiliation and opportunity. He wanted revenge against Emily for destroying a lucrative empire, and he wanted to claim what scraps of Carter's kingdom remained. Vincent watched her from the shadows of Queens, using loyal men to track all her movements. But unlike Alexander, he didn't plan to silence her with threats. He wanted to make her an example. One evening, Emily found her car door etched with a deep slash and a small envelope taped to the windshield. Inside, an old photograph of her as a child on her father's lap. Across it, in red ink, "Still Daddy's girl. Still ours to break." Her breath shook as she realized the fight wasn't over. Despite the threats, Emily pressed forward with her mission. She helped establish the Carter Restitution Fund, a massive initiative that redirected seized assets from her father's empire into affordable housing and tenant protections. Communities once strangled by Carter enterprises began to rebuild. Mothers who'd been evicted returned to new apartments. Local activists hailed Emily as a warrior, a giant slayer. Yet Emily never let them see how hollow she sometimes felt. Every courtroom victory, every cheering protest, none erased the memory of her childhood, the nights she sat by her father's office door, listening to the crackle of his whiskey glass and the coldness of his voice. Justice had been served. Revenge had been exacted. But peace? That was farther away than ever. Michael Torres remained by Emily's side, chronicling the aftermath. His articles had turned her into a symbol, but he now feared symbols were targets. One night, in his office crowded with papers, he told her bluntly, "You need to leave New York, Emily. Vincent Rossi has eyes everywhere. I've investigated him. He isn't like your father. He doesn't care about image or legitimacy. He deals in bodies." Emily met his gaze. "Running makes me like everyone my father scared into silence. That's not who I am." Michael exhaled, frustrated. "Then at least accept that this isn't just a legal war anymore. It's survival." Emily didn't answer. But his words planted roots. Weeks later, Emily's worst fears materialized. On a late walk back from a tenant meeting, she noticed her security team had thinned. Before she could react, a van screeched beside her. Men in masks shoved her inside, a cloth biting against her mouth. When she awoke, she was tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse along the docks. The smell of oil and rust filled the room. Vincent Rossi stepped into the light, his thick frame and scarred jaw leering at her. "You think you destroyed Carter Enterprises, little girl?" he said, circling her chair. "No. You just freed it, for me. But before I build it again, I'm going to erase you from the picture, make sure no one ever forgets what happens to traitors." Emily's pulse raced, but her mind sharpened. She had lived her entire life under her father's threats. Fear was no stranger. Rage was her companion. "If you kill me, Vincent," she said, voice steady, "you make me a martyr. And my story will bury you before you even rise." Vincent snarled, pressing a knife against her cheek. "Or maybe I make you vanish so clean, people forget you ever lived." But before his blade could cut, distant sirens wailed. Michael had tracked her phone before it was discarded, and the police stormed the warehouse. In the chaos, Vincent slipped into the shadows, escaping yet again. Emily was free, but the message was clear. The war had escalated. Emily spiraled after the kidnapping. Nights of paranoia consumed her. She checked every lock in her apartment twice, carried a gun in her handbag, and mistrusted every stranger on the street. Revenge had always given her purpose, but now it threatened to drown her. Michael confronted her gently. "If you let Vincent consume your every thought, he wins before lifting a finger. You beat your father by staying smarter, calmer, steadier. Do the same with Rossi." But Emily's voice cracked with bitterness. "You don't understand, Michael. My whole life has been about fighting men like him. If I stop, what's left of me? The silence between them lingered like an unspoken truth. Emily no longer knew if she was fighting for justice, or because vengeance had become her identity. Emily decided she wouldn't just hide or wait for Rossi to strike again. She would dismantle him like she did her father. With Michael's contacts, she dug into Rossi's activities: hidden drug routes, illegal casinos, smuggling rings. Gregory Banks provided more intel, tracing the financial arteries Rossi fed on after Carter's fall. Piece by piece, Emily mapped his network. And then she began cutting it one vein at a time, leaking files anonymously to law enforcement, orchestrating surprise raids on his operations, convincing lieutenants to flip when arrests piled up. Rossi's grip weakened. His revenues shrank. His people whispered that he was losing his edge. For Emily, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about erasing every trace of her father's poisonous legacy, this time at its most brutal roots. But Vincent Rossi wasn't Alexander Carter. He didn't fight through courts or politics. He fought with bullets. The confrontation came one rain-slicked night in Brooklyn. Emily, leaving a strategy meeting, felt the tension in the air before she saw him. Rossi emerged from an alley, his pistol gleaming in the orange glow of streetlights. "You should have stayed the lawyer, sweetheart," he hissed. "Now you're nothing but another body no one will find." Emily's hand trembled as she reached for her own weapon. She had never pulled a trigger on a man before. "Do it," Rossi taunted, stepping closer. "Show the city that the Carter blood runs true, that you're as much a killer as your father was." Shouts cut through the night as undercover officers Michael had tipped off converged. Rossi fired wildly, bullets sparking against brick walls. Emily dropped behind a car, heart pounding. When it ended minutes later, Rossi lay cuffed and bleeding, screaming vengeance even as he was dragged away. Emily lowered her weapon, her whole body shaking. She hadn't killed him. She hadn't stained her hands. But she had been willing. And that scared her more than anything. Vincent Rossi faced federal charges that would keep him behind bars for life. Emily testified against him, her words sharp as blades, but her spirit felt heavier than ever. The public saw her as a victor again. The daughter of corruption who had burned not one, but two empires of crime. And yet, inside, she wondered what part of her soul had been consumed in the fire. Did revenge free her? Or had it chained her to darkness forever? In her final address at a community rally, she spoke not as a warrior, but as a woman scarred and uncertain. "My fight was never about being a hero," she confessed. "It was survival. It was survival against my own blood, against my own city. And survival leaves wounds. But if these wounds teach us anything, let it be this: justice isn't born from wealth or intimidation, it's born from refusing to stay silent, no matter the cost." The crowd cheered, but Emily's heart remained quiet. Freedom, she realized, was not the absence of enemies. It was the strength to keep walking, even when revenge had hollowed so much of her. And so she walked on, into the fragile dawn of a life still haunted, but finally, completely her own. Months passed after Vincent Rossi's conviction, but Emily Carter could not shake the weight of her family name. Everywhere she went, courtrooms, protests, charity events, people whispered. Some praised her as a crusader, others mocked her as nothing more than a Carter trading one empire for another. At night, when she stared at the city skyline, she saw not towers of steel but grave markers of her father's victims. In her dreams, Alexander's voice returned, taunting her. "No matter what you do, Emily, you're still my daughter. You can never cleanse what runs in your veins." At first, she dismissed these nightmares as trauma. But eventually, she began to wonder, was she doomed to repeat him in different clothing? One autumn morning, Emily was invited to Washington, D.C., to speak before a Senate committee on housing reform. Her legal expertise and activist work had given her immense credibility. After her testimony, a senator pulled her aside. "You have charisma, Miss Carter. The people see you as proof that corruption can be rooted out. Have you considered politics? We could back a campaign. Congress. Maybe one day, even more." The words stunned her. Politics was exactly what her father had manipulated for decades, and now she was being offered the same doors, only under the banner of justice. That night she confided in Michael. "If I enter politics, am I continuing his legacy, or am I rewriting it?" she asked. Michael, ever pragmatic, replied, "That depends on who you let yourself become. The danger isn't in power itself, Emily. It's in forgetting why you fought to get it." Despite her accomplishments, Emily struggled with scars. Therapy sessions revealed feelings she buried under her armor: guilt for destroying her father, fear of how easily she embraced vengeance, confusion over what love or family even meant anymore. Sometimes, she stood outside the prison where Alexander was held. She never went inside, never faced him again. But knowing he was alive, rotting, gnawed at her. Did he think of her as a traitor? Did he think of her at all? The questions dug deeper than any courtroom battle had managed. Seeking clarity, Emily returned to the communities where her fight had first begun. In Brownsville, she visited families who now lived in apartments funded by the Carter Restitution Fund. Children played in courtyards once abandoned. Murals painted heroes, not tycoons, with spray cans of hope. People thanked her, embraced her, prayed for her. For the first time in years, Emily felt something stir inside her chest, something she had almost forgotten existed. It wasn't rage. It wasn't vengeance. It was peace. But peace came with a price. A teenage boy approached her quietly, eyes heavy with blame. "You helped my mom get our place back," he said. "But my dad? He never came home after your father's men beat him years ago. You can't give that back, can you?" Emily's throat tightened. She realized he was right. Some wounds could never be healed by money or justice. Some shadows were permanent. The more Emily worked, the more offers flooded her: political campaigns, leadership roles, even television deals. She had become a symbol, and the world wanted to claim her. But standing at the crossroads, she asked herself the hardest question: who was Emily Carter without revenge? Without a cause to fight against, what identity remained? After weeks of silence, she made her choice. She refused political office. Instead, she dedicated herself to building a legal institute for young lawyers, a place where fighting corruption wasn't about legacy or fame but about principle. "I don't want to be another Carter on a stage," she told Michael. "I want to build an army of voices louder than mine." Surprisingly, the decision calmed her. For once, she wasn't chasing shadows, she was building light. One winter morning, Emily received a letter in neat, slanted handwriting. The prison seal was unmistakable. Her father. "Emily," it read. "You think you won. But I see you everywhere, the papers, the protests, the speeches. You're not so different from me, daughter. You love the fight as much as I did. The only difference is I admitted it. You call it justice. I called it empire. Same blood. Same hunger. In the end, we are mirror images, and no mirror lies forever." Emily burned the letter in her fireplace without finishing it. She refused to let his words infect her again. Yet, as she watched the ashes float away, she whispered to herself, "I'll never be you." But deep down, she feared a sliver of his prophecy might be true. Years later, Emily stood at the dedication of her legal institute. Dozens of young lawyers and activists filled the hallway, their energy vibrant, their ideas uncorrupted. A reporter asked her, "Do you believe your father would have ever imagined this as your legacy?" Emily smiled faintly, though her eyes held storms. "My father's imagination was too small. He thought legacy was measured in money and buildings. I measure it in lives saved, justice served, and voices freed. That's a Carter legacy worth leaving behind." Applause shook the room. For once, she didn't feel the need to glance over her shoulder, searching for shadows. As years passed, Alexander Carter's name faded. History books no longer hailed him as a brilliant mogul, they branded him a crook. His empire was remembered not for wealth, but for its collapse at the hands of his own daughter. And that, Emily realized, was the quietest, most enduring revenge of all. Not his death. Not his prison time. But his erasure. He wanted immortality. She gave him oblivion. Standing over her institute's courtyard as students debated passionately below, Emily understood, she had not broken free of her blood. She had redefined it. Justice was not opposite to revenge. It was revenge's higher form. Time passed. The city rebuilt. Carter Enterprises remained only as a cautionary tale in economics classes, a case study in corruption, greed, and downfall. Emily Carter, however, remained present, not in headline-splashing scandal, but in steady work as the head of the Carter Legal Institute. She trained hundreds of young lawyers to fight systemic abuse, giving them resources she never had when she started. But despite her victories, the years wore on her. She had sacrificed youth to vengeance, friends to secrecy, and love to paranoia. At 35, Emily had accomplished more than most, but felt hollowed by battles that never ended. Then came the news: Alexander Carter, aged and weakened, had suffered a stroke inside prison. His condition was critical. Emily hadn't stepped inside a prison or hospital since law school. But something pulled her to see him one last time. Under the sterile hum of fluorescent lights, she entered a guarded ward. There he lay, her father. The once towering mogul was now a frail man, tubes feeding his failing body. Yet even on the brink of death, his eyes retained a flicker of defiance. "You came," he rasped. Emily stood at the foot of the bed. "Not for you. For me. To end this." A ghost of a smile crossed Alexander's lips. "You think you ended me before. You never did. Every fight you chose, every headline you claimed, it was all chasing me. Even now. I live in you." Emily's fists clenched, but she did not lash out. Instead, she leaned close, her voice calm as stone. "No. I was forged by you, but I am not you. When you die, your empire dies with you. When I live, what I've built survives. That's the difference. That's why I won." For the first time, Alexander's gaze faltered. Then it dimmed, gently, like a candle snuffed by wind. He exhaled one final breath, and was gone. Emily didn't cry. She felt only release. The funeral was small, attended mostly by distant relatives, former allies too ashamed to be seen, and paparazzi hungry for spectacle. Emily stood far from the graveyard, watching the coffin being lowered without stepping forward. Michael walked beside her. "You don't want to speak?" "There's nothing left to say," she replied. "My father lived for legacy. Let the silence be his legacy." And with that, she turned her back before the coffin hit the ground. Over the following years, Emily poured herself into her institute. She launched legal aid centers across the country, expanded programs tackling housing rights, and even collaborated internationally. For once, her name wasn't tied to destruction, it was tied to hope. Still, deep down, she sometimes wondered, did she create this to heal the world, or to heal herself from what her father broke? One evening, while lecturing to a group of law students, she ended her talk with words she wished someone had told her at their age. Don't fight corruption because it destroyed my family. Fight it because, if you don't, it will destroy yours. On the 10th anniversary of Carter Enterprises' collapse, Emily visited Brooklyn again. The streets no longer bore fear. Children played without eviction shadows looming. The community center, once a hub of protest, now hosted music festivals and cultural nights. As she walked, she overheard strangers saying her name with gratitude instead of suspicion. "She's the reason we're still here," one woman whispered to another. For the first time in her life, Emily felt close to peace. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't whole. But it was real. That night, she sat by her window and wrote a letter to her father. "You always said I'd never escape you. And in one way, you were right. I didn't escape. I transformed. I took everything you gave me, your name, your anger, your blood, and I turned it against you. I built something better from the ruins. You taught me ruthlessness. I taught myself conscience." She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer she never intended to open again. Years later, Emily stood before a graduating class at her institute. The students had grown up in a city no longer ruled by her father's shadow. Her speech that day was not about revenge, not even about justice. It was about choice. "You will all be tempted," she told them. "By money, by power, by shortcuts. My father believed corruption was survival. I believed revenge was survival. But survival is too small a goal for someone capable of justice. Choose better. Choose harder. Because in the end, the world remembers what you chose more than what you fought." Thunderous applause filled the hall. Emily smiled, truly smiled, for perhaps the first time since childhood. Emily Carter lived decades more, always careful never to let ambition corrode her purpose. When she died, her obituary did not headline her as daughter of Alexander Carter. It read, "Emily Carter, lawyer, reformer, educator, and the woman who reshaped America's fight against corruption, has passed away at the age of 84. She leaves behind a legacy of justice, built not on wealth or empire, but on truth." On her institute's wall, engraved in marble, was a single quote attributed to her. "Justice is revenge perfected. But it is also the choice to build after you burn." In that line lived her entire story, born from corruption, forged in betrayal, sharpened in vengeance, and finally, released into legacy. Emily was remembered not as a victim, nor merely a survivor, but as a creator. And Alexander Carter, once mighty, was a ghost, long forgotten by the world